Diablo IV was initially released on June 5, 2023. Developed and published by Blizzard Entertainment, and is the fourth mainline installment of the Diablo franchise. The timeline of this installment takes place 50 years after the events of Diablo III: Reaper of Souls. We are given a prelude to the events that have taken place several weeks just before the initial start of the game. Two mercenaries and a swordsman, along with a scholar named Simon, a curate from the Church of Light, venture forth seeking treasures and lost knowledge. The swordsman, who was in fact later revealed to be Elias, a high-ranking priest of the Temple of the Triune, had an ulterior motive of reviving Lilith, a demoness and the daughter of Mephisto, one of the three prime evils within the Diablo universe, who serves as the main antagonist of the game. The swordsman is successful in his endeavor, and the other two mercenaries, along with Simon the Scholar, willingly sacrifice themselves through Elias's manipulation as part of a blood ritual, summoning Lilith to once again return to Sanctuary. Sanctuary, or the world that was shaped by Lilith and Inarius through the use of the World Stone, a powerful shard that was in fact the eye of Anu, the creator of the Diablo universe, during an effort to achieve a more perfect self, which resulted in a battle that raged for time immemorial, eventually resulting in the demise of Anu and Tathamat, which was an extrapolation of everything he deemed evil and impure. After their death, the spine of Anu became the bedrock from which all angels are born, and the rotting carcass of Tathamat became the spawning pool from which the very burning hells and all demons derive from, the derivatives of which sought to continue the war that the first beings of the universe had begun. Angels and demons waged an eternal conflict over the remnants of Anu, specifically the Eye, or World Stone, having infinite power and the ability to alter the aspect of reality itself. Lilith, better known as one of the shapers of Sanctuary and mother to all of humanity, alongside Inarius, an angel of the high heavens and father to mankind, stole the World Stone and used it to shape the world of Sanctuary as a means of escaping the eternal conflict, creating the perfect paradise, in which much of the Diablo franchise takes place, creating a refuge for many like-minded angels and demons seeking to escape the war. Unfortunately, the conflict between the high heavens and the burning hells followed them. Lilith, having been banished from this plane of existence more than once before, has returned to save it from an oncoming threat posed by the prime evils or other elements. However, if history holds true, her motives are not always so benign. Act 1. The fourth installment begins with our character, the Wanderer, traveling on a nameless horse in a world riddled by demons and devastated by conflict that has little regard for humanity. It is here that we begin our story, the events of which seem to be written with ink that has dried some time ago. Many of the events told throughout the 6 acts of the game appear to be from the perspective of someone speaking in hindsight. After losing their horse to odd events, the Wanderer is then stranded and forced to wade through harsh conditions amid a fierce blizzard, eventually finding refuge in a cave. A large black wolf seemingly haunts our steps and our dreams much of the way. After a brief respite, we decide to leave the cave and travel to a nearby town in hopes of finding better shelter. Many of the towns often appear barren or unkempt due to the events after Diablo III: Reaper of Souls that saw an overwhelming majority of mankind wiped out. Fortunately, Nevesk appears to be home to a small group of people who offer us shelter. However, they fear an encroaching evil that appears to be building in the ruins north of town. We decide to venture forth and deal with this anomaly. Upon our return, the small group appears surprised by our success, resulting in a merriment of food and music. Unfortunately, not all is what it seems. As we indulge in the offerings, we find ourselves drugged by the very same people we saved. This fanatical group then feeds you petals of blood belonging to Lilith while you are unconscious, as part of a ritualistic sacrifice. Thankfully, however, a monk from the Cathedral of Light, by the name of Yosef, who had also been drugged by the people of Nevesk, saves you, forcing you to wake and fight your way out. After speaking with Yosef, you both make your way to the church within Nevesk to gain a better understanding of what had transpired in this town. After ingesting these petals of blood, you realize that you can see visions linked to Lilith each time you come across more petals of her blood. You learn that some time ago, Lilith, alongside a pale man, had visited the church and spread her influence to the people within, followers of the Cathedral of Light. Her very presence corrupts those around her to give in to every sin or desire, twisting each emotion. After explaining your vision to Yosef, mentioning that the people of Nevesk regarded Lilith as their mother, Yosef urges you to seek a hermit living in the outskirts of town and to bring him to the Cathedral of Light. After finding the hermit's home empty and searching for clues, he arrives shortly after to find you in his home. The hermit known as Lorath invites you to supper, in which you explain the events that have just transpired. His outlook is grim, and he tells you that you have just ingested the blood of the demon Lilith, the mother of Sanctuary, who is also the daughter of Mephisto, Lord of Hatred. He tells you that her return has been long prophesied, and that you seem to share a link to her. Unsure of your connection exactly, he knows that her return bodes ill for all humanity. You decide to use this connection to your advantage, and the both of you travel to Kyovashad, a large town that is home to one of the churches for the Cathedral of Light. Along your journey with Lorath, he informs you that Inarius, an angel and the father of Sanctuary, is real. In fact, he walks the world of Sanctuary and leads the fervent beliefs behind the Cathedral of Light itself. Lorath also notes that Inarius and Lilith have an ancient feud that will see the world dragged down into a conflict that could destroy humanity itself unless they can stop it. He mentions that Inarius had been trapped in hell for a time, and possibly warped by its influence, that the prophecy that foretold Lilith's return also mentioned that the world would see the rise of the prime evils and the doom of the entire world. However, Inarius opted to use this prophecy for his own selfish purposes, turning it into gospel and placing himself as the hero who would save the world. Lorath mentions that he will travel to the dry steppes in search of understanding more about this pale man, whom you had seen in your vision with Lilith. As Lorath begins to depart, you learn that he is in fact one of the few remaining Haradrim, an ancient order of scholars and mages who have sworn to protect the world from demons. He tells you to meet him in the dry steppes, but suggests that you seek out Donan first, another Haradrim who could have invaluable information about how to combat this oncoming threat. He also mentions that you should meet with the Cathedral of Light, as Yosef had suggested, as they could prove to be useful allies in the battle ahead. Lorath departs, and we travel to the church within Kyovashad to seek out Reverend Mother Prava. She is already aware of the return of Lilith and asks us to investigate a possible sighting of her near the Yelesna mines. We also learn that the prophecy's original author was in fact Rathma, the son of both Lilith and Inarius. We travel to Yelesna in search of a knight by the name of Vigo. We are made aware that a girl along with her mother have also been asking Vigo and the escort of knights to investigate a possible sighting of Lilith. As we reach the mine's entrance, we encounter Vigo and a young girl by the name of Neyrel. We learn that Neyrel and her mother have studied many of the Haradric works, and that her mother, along with an escort of knights, were allowed into the mines by Vigo, even though the Cathedral of Light had sealed off its entrance. Reluctantly, we venture forth and investigate as a trio. We encounter demons as we delve deeper into the mines, and Neyrel learns that Vigo now wears a valuable trinket on his wrist that once belonged to her mother, clearly given in trade as a means of allowing access to the sealed mines. We learn that the knights of the cathedral generally have little knowledge about why the mines were sealed to outsiders and what might lie within. Neyrel comments that her mother's behavior has been strange of late, and that her leaving is unlike her. As we reach the bottom of the mines, we discover an ancient ruin and learn that Lilith was indeed present along with Neyrel's mother Venard. Unfortunately, the entire escort of knights had been brutally slain. Vigo, after being shocked by the scene and the words of his dying comrade, flees and leaves Neyrel and the Wanderer alone to continue their journey. We venture forth through the ancient ruins and encounter more of Lilith's blood petals, all of which grant us visions of Neyrel's mother and Lilith. We begin to clearly see the gradual deterioration of her mother's mind as Lilith tempts her with forbidden and lost knowledge, something she has spent her entire life as well as her daughters in search of. We learn that Lilith's true goal is to find her son, Rathma, his temple apparently lying deeper within these ancient ruins. We also come across several writings left behind by Neyrel's mother, many of which begin to unravel the mysteries that humanity has sought since their inception. Venard writes that Lilith and Inarius had shaped Sanctuary itself and had given birth to humanity, along with many other angels and demons. We learn that Inarius felt threatened by the power of humanity, otherwise known as Nephilim, and felt that the genocide of them was the only route left to him. Lilith, feeling that all Nephilim were her children, quietly felled every other angel and demon who plotted with Inarius. When Inarius became aware of what she had done, he banished her to the void, being unwilling to kill her himself. Inarius then decided to use the World Stone to alter the Nephilim and their powers, weakening them generation by generation, until not a single Nephilim remembered who they once were, and thus humanity was born. We are granted more visions of Venard and Lilith, and learn that a ritual must be performed in order to reach Rathma's sanctum, and that blood is the key. Neyrel's mother appears far gone and overtaken by Lilith's corrupting influence by this time. In her last writing, she is pleased with Lilith and excited by the taste and use of blood belonging to a priest they had encountered as they reached the ritual site. After reaching the site ourselves, we encounter Venard, who is steadily scrawling ancient symbols and glyphs in her own blood. She was able to open the way for Lilith, but lacking a certain divine element herself, she was left behind. Neyrel pleads with her mother to abandon this madness, but Venard has grown zealous in her adoration of Lilith. Her mind quickly turns on her own daughter, believing that she has come to steal the vast troves of knowledge for herself, and attacks Neyrel and the Wanderer, ending with her own death. Neyrel, mourning the loss of her mother, vows vengeance against Lilith, and asks you to return to Reverend Mother Prava to seek a divine blessing as she endeavors to travel to a nearby Horadric vault that could have secret knowledge on the ritual that her mother was attempting to complete. She also plans to lay her mother to rest nearby. We travel to Corvalar in search of Prava, a defensive outpost built by the Cathedral of Light to withstand the onslaught of the burning hells. Once there, we meet Vigo, who states that he came clean about taking Venard's bribe to Prava and asks to meet her together in hopes of being spared her ire. It appears that the Cathedral of Light has been preparing for war and is in the midst of a war council. After speaking with Prava, she states that in order to receive the divine blessing, we must first cleanse our spirit in order to be made worthy. Vigo accompanies us and reveals the path that we must take. Shrines that take on our sin and weigh us down must be carried from shrine to shrine as we make our journey to Inarius' location. After reaching the Alabaster Monastery, Inarius' current location, we once again meet Vigo, who is still dealing with the guilt of the bribe he took, which led to the deaths of numerous knights and allowed Lilith and Venard to enter the ancient ruins. We venture forth in search of Inarius and meet one of the curators of the monastery. He states that Inarius traveled to meet his son Rathma after learning of Lilith's return in an effort to gain additional clarity regarding the prophecy. He has spent his time meditating ever since his return from Rathma. When we finally meet Inarius and ask for his blessing, he speaks in a manner of resignation and notes that everything, including Sanctuary's creators, appear to be rotting from the inside. He bids us to leave him be. We then return to Corvalar and meet with Prava. She mentions that Inarius, once cast down by the heavens for creating Sanctuary and humanity, can once again return if he slays Lilith, according to their interpretation of the prophecy. We mention that Inarius refused to bless us, but Prava takes the fact that we're still standing as proof enough, and Inarius did indeed approve the blessing. We attain the blessing and return to seek out Neyrel. Upon reaching the woods near the Horadric Vault, we're caught in an illusion created by the Horadrim. We meet the Black Wolf who can speak. He claims that he is able to assist us in escaping the illusion. The Bloodied Wolf leads us through a portal and explains that our motives align. He too wishes to see Lilith stopped, and mentions that he's been watching us since the very beginning, claiming to have helped us when we lost our horse and when we sought shelter in a nearby cave. Finally, the wolf mentions that if we continue to follow the Horadrim, our path will only lead in failure, fire, and death. We leave the wolf through the portal he provides and find ourselves near Neyrel once again. Together, we enter the Horadric vault. We split up to scour the troves of knowledge in search of something that might shed some light on the ritual that Vinard had worked. We encounter a powerful demon who was guarding a particular book deep within the vault's various chambers. A book called Death Harnessed: Theories of Rathma. After slaying the demon, we return to Neyrel with book in hand. She states that her search was fruitless, but that the book regarding Rathma's theories as the first necromancer, coupled with her knowledge of the Horadrim, might be enough to revive her mother, and perhaps she will help finish the ritual. Returning to the ancient ruins and the ritual location, Neyrel uses the knowledge from the book to revive her mother's spirit for a short time. She is now free of Lilith's corruption and helps to complete the ritual. The Wanderer provides a bit of their now blessed blood, and we venture forth. Soon after completing the ritual, her mother passes on once again, and Neyrel opts to stay behind, mourning for her mother. She motions you onward and mentions that she will travel back to the vault to bury her mother nearby, and continue scouring the vault for knowledge. We travel across the Black Lake and into the memorial site. Once there, we encounter a phantasm of Rathma himself. He states that Inarius was there first and was driven by fear regarding the prophecy, and that he manipulated its meaning to be centered around himself instead. Rathma locked the gates to hell in an effort to prevent Inarius from proceeding with his false version of the prophecy. We then encounter a powerful demon that blocks our way, but are then joined by Vigo during the fight. He was wearing a set of special armor given to those seeking penance within the ranks of the Knight Penitent. Every fragment of armor was laden with spikes, which pierced the wearer from within. As we remove the pieces of armor from Vigo, he bleeds out even quicker, and resolves that this punishment is indeed a just one. He asks the Wanderer to return the trinket he took as a bribe to Neyrel, and at his last moments, wonders if he had repented enough to find salvation. We finally reach Rathma's sanctum, only to find his corpse and more of Lilith's blood petals nearby. The vision we're granted reveals that Rathma had been slain by his own father, and Lilith entered the sanctum sometime later to find his body. She vowed vengeance and pulled the staff from Rathma's body, shattering it and revealing the key to hell hidden within. We then return to Neyrel outside the Horadric vault and explain the events that had transpired. Disheartened, she returns to the vault to continue studying, and we leave for Skazglen in search of Donan, a Horadrim, and one of Lorath's few friends. Act 2. We travel to Skazglen and reach the Eldheim Keep in search of Donan. Immediately as we enter, we overhear an elderly man telling a story to a group of children about a great and powerful demon by the name of Astaroth, who was overthrown and defeated by 3 legendary heroes: Erida, who called down a storm against the demon with music; Nefane, who transformed and slashed the demon with fang and claw; and finally, Donan, who reached into the demon's chest and crushed its heart with his palm. So too were the days of Ash. As we navigate amongst the people within the keep in search of Donan, we learn that a great deal of animosity exists between the natives of Skazglen and the Cathedral of Light. The natives desire to live in harmony and peace with the land, respecting the old ways and the Skatsim religion, a direct contradiction to that of the cathedral and its ways. Finally, we reach the main keep to find Donan and his son Yorin discussing a private matter. We overhear that Yorin is eager to embrace the world as a man, venturing out on his own and accompanying the knights of the cathedral out on patrol. But Donan is worried and concerned with losing the shelter any father might provide for his son. Donan, however, reluctantly allows his son to travel with the Knights Penitent on their way to Braestag. We explain the events thus far to Donan and mention that Lorath sent us. He is surprised to hear from Lorath, as it has been years since they last spoke. He mentions that Lorath is not great at being a good friend, and is oftentimes lax in his communication. He is surprised to learn that Rathma is dead. Donan was the one who originally received the prophecy from Rathma and brought it to Inarius to interpret, but he never imagined that Inarius would kill his own son over it. Donan also mentions that Lilith is in search of Astaroth, now that she has the key to hell, but is unsure what her motives might be beyond that. Donan asks us to investigate a disturbance within Firebreak Manor nearby, one that might relate to the events regarding Lilith. Once arriving, we search the manor for clues, and we come across a piece of parchment sent by Reverend Mother Prava. She expresses her condolences to Donan with regard to the loss of his wife. She reasons that Donan is now smothering his son Yoren too much from the world because of his grief and fear of losing all he has left. She asks Donan to have faith and let the light of Inarius protect his son as he finds his own way in the world. Finally, we reach Donan's study and identify a group of blood petals that were left behind. The vision grants us a scene of Donan in his study, when suddenly a doorway appears, giving access to Lilith. She asks Donan for the location of Astaroth, but Donan claims that he is dead and refuses her requests. Lilith rebukes his claims and states that Astaroth cannot die by his hands. She glances at the portrait of the three legendary heroes nearby, Erida, Nefane, and Donan himself, then decides to leave a befuddled Donan. The vision ends, and immediately a signal horn is blown outside the Firebreak Manor. They're under attack. The Wanderer leaps into action and slays dozens of demons. We encounter Donan in the midst of combat. After discussing the vision, we conclude that the portrait of them that Lilith saw will likely lead her to question the other heroes. We travel in search of their whereabouts and learn the location of Nefane, who lives deep in the moors from one of the Knights Penitent. In our search for Nefane, we encounter a white wolf, who appears to recognize and evaluate us for a moment. Hearing our request, it then decides to lead us to Nefane. As we travel deeper into the moors, we notice the land change into a nightmarish and putrid land of gnarled roots and shallow walks of blood that have drunken deep into the land itself. As we follow the wolf deeper, we finally reach the source of all this corruption and blood, Nefane. Somehow, still alive even after being sliced in two and pinned to a tree, he is still able to speak and remarks that Lilith has done this to him. He readily offers up any information that could prove useful to us regarding her whereabouts. We travel to the location noted by Nefane and find traces of Lilith, who is attempting to revive a beast known as an amalgam of rage. We begin a fierce battle with the creature, but it escapes before we're able to strike the final blow. We return to Nefane and explain that Lilith has escaped us along with the beast that appears to have been born from Nefane's blood. He begins to regret his part in all the events that have transpired. He explains that he offered information to Lilith, the location of Astaroth's body, in exchange for helping to rid Skazglen of the Cathedral of Light and its influence. He explains that the body is hidden within Eldheim Keep, and that he was overwhelmed with rage while in Lilith's presence, which led to his rash decisions. Before departing, he asks one final quest of us: to end his suffering. The wolf howls in mourning. We travel to Braestag in search of Erida next, but encounter Donan's son, Yoren, and a contingent of knights along the way. A few of the knights mention that the path up the mountain to where Erida resides is cloudy and foggy, dangerous even, and suggest waiting for it to clear. However, time is of the essence, and Yoren offers to help lead the way. Reluctantly, the knights allow Yoren to accompany the Wanderer. Yoren mentions that he longs for adventure and freedom, but that his father Donan shelters him too much from the world. He is enamored by the Wanderer and all of their freedoms. As we move closer to Erida's domain, spirits of the dead attacked Yoren and the Wanderer. Their behavior seems odd and novel to them. We fear the worst. Making haste, we continue onward, and we find several defiled tombs and effigies along the way, many of which speak to the pain of loss and countless sacrifices that have now called this place home. Erida is meant to be their keeper and offer peace to the dead, but it would seem that she has fallen to Lilith's corruption somehow. Leaving Yoren behind to escort a couple of villagers we encountered along the way back to Braestag, the Wanderer travels onward in their search for Erida. Finally, after locating her at the top of the mountain, the storm that rages around her is her doing, and she explains that she has traded with Lilith in an effort to make her people stronger, strong enough to fight the hell that is to come. She didn't want more of her people to die needlessly, which is why she sought strength. She explains that her people have forgotten the strength it took to defeat Astaroth originally, and that if we want to know what she traded Lilith in return, we must fight her to the death. After defeating her in combat, dying, she states that she has given Lilith the means by which to break the wards around Astaroth's body and release him from the prison that holds him. We make way for Eldheim, hoping that we're not too late, but the moment we arrive, flames and destruction have overtaken the keep. Demons scour the area. We fight our way through in search of survivors and Donan. Eventually, we reach Donan deep within the keep, as he is in the midst of performing the last rites for several knights who have lost their lives. He explains that Lilith and Nephane's monstrous beast tore through the keep and the men who stood guard. However, his life was spared, Lilith seemingly toying with him. Donan finally admits that he did not in fact destroy Astaroth, as the legends would have claimed. He imprisoned him in a soulstone deep beneath the keep and built Eldheim over it. He inquires about Yoren's whereabouts, having not seen him for a while. They decide to keep moving after Lilith and opt to search for Yoren along the way. We encounter a slain escort of knights who should have been accompanying Yoren when Donan last saw his son, but Yoren was thankfully not among them. Our pace quickens as Donan grows frantic in our pursuit of Lilith, fearing the worst. We reach the Soulstone chamber, only to find it destroyed and opened, a trail of blood petals left nearby. The vision we receive shows us Lilith offering revenge to Astaroth by giving Yoren over to be his new vessel, the ultimate revenge against Donan. In exchange, Lilith will receive safe passage through hell to a place that she is no longer welcome. Donan is devastated by the news and refuses to believe it. Having studied the Soulstone for years, he believes that he might still have a way to save his son. He asks us to travel with him to Karagar, believing that Astaroth will likely target that area first. We reach a ruined Karagar, wreathing in fire and destruction. As we travel deeper into the settlement, we find Lilith and Astaroth waiting for us. Not a trace of Yoren is left, and Astaroth is now fully in control, riding the bloody amalgam of a beast that Lilith conjured with Nephane's blood. A fierce battle commences as Donan looks on, clearly shattered by events. After the demon and beast were slain, Donan tentatively moves toward Astaroth's body, removing the Soulstone and returning the demonic body back into his son, Yoren. Trembling, he grips the body tightly and begins to sob. The Wanderer tries to find words, but has none, for there are none capable of reaching the ears of mourning. He decides it's better to leave Donan in peace. Act 3. We travel to the Dry Steppes in search of Lorath. Much has happened, and we need to understand the current state of things. However, upon reaching Kedbardu, we find the Horadrim caked in mud and sleeping in a corral, still hungover. The townsfolk claim that he came in search of information regarding a pale man a few days ago, but the knowledge he gained led him into a drunken stupor, thus his current state. Lorath comes to and states that the pale man is in fact his apprentice, Elias, a Horadrim. Lorath believes our next move should be to find Elias, figure out what he's done, and then kill him. We travel to the local inn while Lorath recuperates, seeking knowledge regarding an acquaintance of Lorath's from the Orbe Monastery, but find nothing of the sort. However, the owner states that the pale man was sighted nearby in the canyons. After relaying this information to Lorath, we travel both to check in at the Orbe Monastery and to investigate the sighting near the canyons. We arrive at the canyons first, only to find several of its inhabitants slain, eventually reaching a house belonging to a summoner by the name of Genbar. It appears that Elias and Lilith have influenced him to their side. We arrive too late and find a maddened Genbar who summons several demons to fight us. After our victory, Genbar lays dead along with the demon summoned by Elias. Lorath decides to cut open the demon to investigate what it has recently consumed in hopes of providing insight as to where these demons might be residing. While Lorath investigates the demon, we head to Orbe to check in on the monastery. Upon reaching our destination, we find it empty and unguarded. Signs that Elias has already been here do not bode well for the site. The scholars here appear to have spent their lives devoted to studying dark magic and the evils of this world, things that only the most devout Zakarum faithful were even aware of. We locate one of the scholars in a state of madness, raving that Elias has taken forbidden knowledge and that the archive must be protected at all costs. Unfortunately, upon reaching the archive, we find it to be aflame, and the abbot of Orbe stating that Elias now plans to summon a lesser evil with the knowledge he has gained. We travel back to Lorath and recount the events that have transpired. We return to the demon's body Lorath had been examining and learn that the contents within belonged to one of the nobles of Goron, and thus we travel to our new destination. Unfortunately, Goron is a fortress, and gaining entry is no easy thing. An old friend of Lorath's named Zelaya states that a woman by the name of Oyun is missing, but that she might have the knowledge of a secret tunnel that would lead us deeper into the heart of the fortress. We travel to a nearby market square in search of Oyun and learn that she might have been captured and is likely being held somewhere within an outpost prison. As we make our way deeper into that prison, we finally reach Oyun, who was indeed locked away. Together, we escape the prison and return to Zelaya. Reunited once again, Oyun tells of a secret passage to enter the fortress as she leaves with Zelaya. Lorath and the Wanderer, now armed with new knowledge, make haste. Along the way, Lorath mentions what Elias has been doing to the surrounding areas are possibly clues as to which of the lesser evils he means to summon. Odds are that the anguish and pain he is causing, as well as drowning Goron in blood, will likely lead to summoning Andariel or Duriel himself. As we delve deeper into the fortress, we overhear a conversation with a few of the guards and learn that Elias does indeed intend to summon a lesser evil, Andariel, the Maiden of Anguish. Finally reaching the inner sanctum, we find it empty and Elias is nowhere to be found. However, much of his research and work is left behind. From it, Lorath laments that perhaps he was responsible for Elias going down this path, wishing that he could have foreseen that eventually he would abuse the knowledge gained as an apprentice of the Horadrim, seeking alternate methods to combat evil. We learn that the summoning will take place at Mount Sivo and make haste to stop the ritual. Once there, we realize that in order to gain entry into the temple at Mount Sivo, we must attain the blessings of the prime evils. So the Wanderer decides to take on that burden by visiting each shrine created by the worshippers of the Triune. First, we attain the blessing of Baal, the Lord of Destruction, and thus we speak his true name, Tor Balos. We then move to attain the blessing of Diablo, the Lord of Terror, speaking his true name, Al Diabolos. And finally, we reach the shrine of Mephisto, the Lord of Hatred. Lorath is cautious here, because the Wanderer already has his progeny's bloodline running through their veins. But still, we speak his name, Dol Mephistos. This shrine isn't like the others, and a red portal appears. Stepping through, we are once again face to face with the bloodied wolf. Only now do we understand that this wolf is in fact Mephisto, or at least an avatar of his, and that these portals are echoes of the past tied to the burning hells. In the vision of Sescheron, once the capital city of the barbarians, children of Bolcathos, and a fortress that barred the only way to Mount Ariat, where the World Stone was held. It was now a crumbled ruin, decimated by the hordes of demons that were led by Baal, the Lord of Destruction. Mephisto mentions that Elias's activities have begun to cause echoes of the past to crash with his realm of hatred, and he asks you to fix them to receive his blessing. Upon doing so, and attaining his blessing, he once again warns you against allowing Lilith to fulfill her goals. We meet up with Lorath and enter the temple, now having received the Primeval's blessings. Delving deeper into the temple, we find Elias, along with several acolytes already performing the ritual on a woman who is serving as a catalyst for Andariel's return. Lorath decides to deal with Elias himself, and the Wanderer opts to handle Groll, a massive opponent who is left to guard the ritual. Lorath sneaks up to Elias and stabs him in the neck. He collapses, but within the span of a breath, Elias is gone once again. The woman screams to life, and Lorath carries her away from the ritual while we deal with the tyrant king himself. Afterwards, we head outside to meet up with Lorath and learn that the woman who was being tattooed with blood in the ritual is named Thaisa. She states that she can hear a voice clawing in the back of her mind, and Lorath fears that we are too late and that a connection to Andariel has already been made. Thaisa states that Elias has a refuge far to the east in the deserts of Kyrgyzstan. So, we make way for Tarsarak. Lorath hopes that the people there, who know the deserts well, might be able to shed some light on where this refuge of Elias might be. Thaisa, seeking vengeance, decides to accompany the party. Upon reaching Tarsarak, we learn that Elias's refuge is likely a palace that exists beyond an endless sandstorm in the deserts. But just then, Thaisa had another bout of anguish in her mind as she feels Andario's influence drawing closer. Lorath takes Thaisa to a place where she can quiet her mind, and the wanderer moves to seek a guide that is willing to help us cross the deserts. After searching for some time, we find someone who might just be crazy enough to help us on our journey. An old friend to the Diablo series, Meshif. He is much older now and mistakenly believes that Lorath is his friend Deckard Cain, but decides to guide us once again nonetheless. Leaving Thaisa behind at the Forsaken Chapel, resting on holy ground while she combats the influence of Andariel, the Wanderer, Lorath, and Meshif make their way through the desert. Throughout the trek, Meshif can't help but be enamored by the idea of once again going on an adventure despite his advanced years, regaling the group of his adventures with Deckard in the years past. Finally, the group reaches the palace, and Lorath asks Meshif to stay near the entrance along with the supplies, while he and the Wanderer make their way inside. Lorath suggests that they pose as new disciples to the Temple of the Triune in an effort to make the entry a little less difficult. As we navigate our way through, we learn that Elias has attained access to an ancient artifact previously lost by the descendants of the Amazons, the Sisterhood of the Sightless Eye. It was assumed that the Temple of the Triune had possessed it, but now it appears we are certain. Its ancient magic allows the user to see any place and anywhere in time. At last, we meet Elias face to face, and after a few words, square off in battle. However, upon defeating him, he once again vanishes. Blood petals are all that remain, and the vision grants us a meeting between Elias and Lilith. Lilith explains that she believes the primevals are bound to return, and they will finally destroy Sanctuary itself. Her goal is not to conquer, but to empower her children to stand against their might. A moment later, Elias returns once again, somehow still escaping death. This repeats a few more times until finally Lorath decides to escape after defeating Elias for the fourth time. In the short window after, Lorath opts to steal the Sightless Eye and use it against them. The party then takes the artifact and flees the palace. After reaching the outskirts of the palace itself, we unfortunately find Meshif, wounded and bleeding. After a short while, he breathes his last breath. With death all around and little time to waste, we make our way back to the chapel where Thaisa is sheltering to study the Sightless Eye. Act 4. After recounting the events with Thaisa and evaluating the information at hand, Lorath decides that we need to use the Sightless Eye to get a better idea of what Lilith is up to. The eye grants us sight on Lilith and Elias. We catch part of a conversation. Lilith intends to absorb her father Mephisto's essence while he is still reforming and vulnerable. But before much more could be revealed, Lilith somehow notices the use of the eye to spy on her. We immediately pull away and barely escape her grip. Lorath realizes how dire the situation actually is. Lilith, absorbing Mephisto, would turn her into a primeval herself. He quickly hashes together a plan to stop her quickly, and it will require a soul stone, along with one who has a great deal of knowledge regarding them. Lorath writes a letter and hands it to you, then asks you to find Donan once more. The Wanderer makes way toward Kyovashad, finding Donan, who is now brushed aside by the very Cathedral of Light he so fervently held faith in. He states that Inarius himself told him that he has no use for broken soldiers anymore. What's more, Donan feels slighted by Lorath and his lack of compassion for not mentioning anything about the loss of his son in the letter. Simply more demands. Donan tells us to head toward the Horadric Vault. There, we can find what Lorath seeks. After arriving at the vault, Donan is dismissive of Neyrel, an unknown element who has been studying away in the vault filled with dangerous Horadric knowledge. As Donan and the Wanderer move deeper into the vault, leaving Neyrel to her research, he notes that the Soul Stone that was once used to hold Astaroth will need to be attuned to hold Lilith instead. Otherwise, it will never work and will likely not hold for long. After finding Donan's notes and items for the process, he remarks that he doesn't think he can perform the ritual needed to attune it. We also learn that the falling out between Lorath and Donan was due to him not wanting to give his life to the Horadrim entirely, like Lorath. He wanted to pursue family, glory, and fellowship, but having lost everything dear to him now, he has nothing left. Performing soulstone magic requires a great deal of spirit and faith, something he feels that he has nothing left of, but he will try nonetheless. As we leave the vault, Neyrelle states that she will be coming along, stating that she has been studying the Horadrim and their ways her whole life. Still vowing vengeance against Lilith, Donan can see that he has no right to deny her of that, so the party travels together to meet Lorath. Donan also remarks that Tyrael, an angel, once resided in the vault along with the Horadrim, but that sometime before Elias had betrayed the Horadrim, Tyrael had turned away in fear due to something he had learned, and the group has neither seen or heard of him since. Donan also mentions that the use of a soulstone comes at a cost. It must always be guarded, and in a way, you become a prisoner to it, just as much as the demon inside, and that the peace granted by it is usually short-lived, as it will eventually find a way to break free. After arriving at the chapel with Lorath and Thaisa, they go over the plan to capture Lilith with the soulstone. Thaisa walks outside of the chapel for a moment to get some fresh air. She mentions that Andariel's whispers and screams are growing louder. Just then, the wind outside the chapel picks up, and Elias returns, capturing Thaisa in a trance. He states that the runes drawn in blood over her body serve as a beacon, a waypoint of sorts between realms and a means for which Andariel to find her way back into Sanctuary. He completes the ritual with an unconscious Thaisa, who is then dragged away by Neyrelle back into the chapel. A moment after, Andariel herself now breathes new life and walks the land once again. The Wanderer then faces off in a fierce battle, the likes of which few mortal eyes have ever seen. In the aftermath, and Andariel being no more, Elias flees once again, as the Wanderer speaks with the rest of the group. Thaisa mentions that she was actually hunting Elias before being captured, because he took something from her homeland in Hawazar. She mentions that she has a friend there who has mastered the art of immortality, and that she might be able to shed some light on how Elias can't seem to die. Act 5. We travel to Hawazar and reach the settlement of Zarbenzet, where we find Lorath, Neyrelle, and Thaisa already discussing our next move. Thaisa mentions that seeking out Timwe in the marshes of Hawazar might be our best chance to figure out how to stop Elias, as she has traded power with the swamp before to receive long life. Thaisa mentions that Hawazar isn't exactly a part of Sanctuary, and that the power of the swamp stands outside its influence to a degree, devoid of the eternal conflict. Neyrelle and Lorath decide to begin their search for Timwe, while the Wanderer travels to find Donan in an effort to help him begin to attune the Soulstone. After reaching Donan, he mentions that in the north of Hawazar there lies a Zakarum keep, still laden with Mephisto's hatred and echoes of the past. He mentions that it might be a good place to begin the process of attuning the Soulstone to the essence of hatred itself. We learn that the keep is in fact the Black Tomb itself, an area that now serves as the final resting place of Mephisto's previous host, the Kehegen Sankakor. A Zakarum paladin marshal by the name of Karthus, along with other heroes of the past, buried the body here after defeating him. However, as with other primevals, the wounds they leave behind on the land and its people are seldom ever forgotten, as evil always seems to find a way to endure. As we enter the keep, Donan states that he can still feel the evil and hatred seeping out of the desiccated body within the tomb. However, as he begins the ritual needed to attune the stone, it fails, due to possibly being damaged during the battle with Astaroth. Donan states that it can be repaired, but it does require a few items. We head to a nearby village in search of the items required and are directed to a tower nearby, which is home to a person that the villagers there call the Witch of the Swamp. Upon entering the tower, we learn that Thaisa is in fact also the Witch of the Swamp. We explain the situation, and reluctantly, she offers assistance, but states that we must visit Valtha, her mentor, and sister in service for the quicksilver needed. Thaisa mentions that we should tread lightly with her. We travel to Valtha's hovel and find it empty for the moment. We learn that Valtha appears to have sided with Lilith because she believes that it is the only way to survive the coming conflict. As we make ready to leave, empty-handed, we are stopped by Valtha, who immediately attacks us, stating that Lilith is inevitable and the only path forward. After defeating her, we acquire the Quicksilver and return to the tower with Donan and Thaisa. As Donan attempts the process to repair the Soul Stone, Thaisa mentions that he has yet to face his grief and loss, that perhaps he is struggling to find the will and spirit required to repair the stone. His attempts continue to be met in failure, so Thaisa suggests that we travel to a place of old power deep within the swamp, that it might help Donan find his strength once again. Upon reaching the ritual grounds, Thaisa mentions that this place is where you can face your inner demons, be they grief or fears. We gather the items needed to perform the ritual and brew a tea to ingest. Donan and the Wanderer reluctantly drink the tea and wait for the swamp to call out to their souls, like drawing poison from a wound. Soon after, Donan begins to have a vision. He sees his son Yoren once again. They speak briefly about letting go and making peace with events. Donan breaks down shortly after and finally confronts his own grief. Meanwhile, the Wanderer also has a vision. A red portal opens up once again. Stepping through, we find ourselves face to face with the Bloodied Wolf, Mephisto's avatar, and standing on Travancore's once holy grounds. Mephisto mentions that we are focusing on the wrong enemy, that Lilith, not Elias, should be our priority. He suggests that we leave the Horadrim to their own fate regarding Elias, and that together they can focus on Lilith. After refusing his offer, he still states that in time, our true friends will be revealed to us. He opens the red portal once again, and mentions that we shouldn't place any faith in Inarius either. As he was once the prisoner of Mephisto as well, he is well aware of the true face and the hatred he still carries. Returning to the tower once again, Thaisa mentions that we had wandered the swamp for several hours, and hopes that Donan is now ready to repair the Soul Stone. This time, Donan's attempt is met with success, and is able to repair the stone. He mentions that he will wait at the keep for the others, and the Wanderer now departs to locate Lorath and Neyrelle to see how they have fared in finding Timway. After assisting them, they finally locate Timway's hovel. She mentions that Elias has likely made a pact with the Tree of Whispers, an ancient power deep within the swamp itself. One of the few ways of finding it requires the burning of a sacred incense, kept near a temple further in the swamp. Lorath and Neyrelle stay behind to further gain insight from Timway, while the Wanderer makes way for the temple to locate the incense. After gaining entry and finding the incense, the Wanderer, Lorath, and Neyrelle meet just outside the temple. Lorath mentions that he learned that Elias likely sought immortality because summoning Lilith would have exacted a heavy toll on any mortal, not to mention the enemies he would have earned along the way. They travel to an altar nearby to burn the incense and wait to be shown the way to the Tree of Whispers. After some time had passed, the party slept, and a giant snake appeared before them, its body now apparently guiding the way to the Tree of Whispers itself. As they get closer to their destination, they begin hearing strange voices in each other's minds, voices calling to them from the Tree of Whispers. After some trial and error, they eventually make their way to the tree itself. Gnarled and ancient, roots growing deep throughout all of Hawazar, and finally, a slew of severed heads hanging from the tree's branches. The price of knowledge, they said. The tree mentions that Elias has escaped them and owes his head to the tree in payment for forbidden knowledge, knowledge that he used in order to learn how to summon Lilith. The tree states that Elias also visited a place that was beyond their reach and sight before making a deal with the tree itself. Perhaps this was where Elias found a way to gain immortality. The trio then travels to the location where the tree states that it cannot reach, the place where Elias visited, a coffin near the shore. Along the way, Lorath mentions that Elias became obsessed and poisoned by the prophecy that Rathma had foretold. That was when Elias began searching for any means of fighting the threat that was to come. After spotting the wreckage of several ships, they begin to make their way through each of the precarious platforms. Upon reaching a blocked passageway, Neyrelle leaves the group to find a way to open it, while the Wanderer and Lorath continue fighting an onslaught of drowned creatures. A moment later, Neyrelle screams in pain on the other side of the blockage. Lorath and the Wanderer rush to her aid, but find her injured on the ground. The wound on her arm is spreading, and its corruption will soon take hold of her entire. Lorath makes the decision to cut part of her arm off in an effort to save her from the drowned corruption. He stays behind to look after her, and asks the Wanderer to continue the journey in search of the coffin. After locating the coffin, the Wanderer begins hearing the voice of the tree, stating that the coffin is the limit of their power and that they can see no further. The only way forward is to enter the coffin and drown. Death is the only way forward, it seems. As darkness takes hold of the Wanderer, and the last vestige of light fades away, sinking further into the sea, we awaken inside a temple of sorts. Immediately, we hear Elias's voice, an echo, stating that it has come in search of answers within Rathma's temple. More echoes of Elias are found throughout the temple, each of them in search of answers. One such echo states that his research has led him to one conclusion, and one conclusion only: that throughout the eternal conflict itself, Lilith was the only being to ever stand against the prime evils, that her goals have only been to empower humanity and secure its birthright. Delving deeper into the sunken temple, we find an altar and a severed finger belonging to Elias. It appears that by keeping a part of himself here in the temple, he is able to attain immortality. The Wanderer takes the finger, only to find that his surroundings immediately begin to fill with water. Drowning once again, we awake at a camp nearby. Lorath and an unconscious Neyrel lay near a fire. Lorath found the Wanderer drifting along in a coffin, clutching a severed finger. After explaining the events of the temple, Lorath and the Wanderer then burn the gnarled finger, destroying Elias's immortality. Neyrel comes to and worries about being left behind or becoming a burden to the group. They steady their resolve and head to the Zakharum Keep to meet up with Donan to perform the ritual. As the group ventures forth and reaches the Black Tomb once again, Neyrel, Lorath, and Donan begin the ritual of attuning the stone. In the midst of their ritual, Elias appears once again. The Wanderer and Thaisa leave the trio to continue their work as the two of them give chase and begin to fight Elias. The Wanderer makes known that they have destroyed Elias's source of immortality. Elias attempts to flee from battle after being mortally wounded, only to be found by the group shortly after. His final words explain that he chose the only path left to him, the path that Lorath would not take, the path that would see Lilith help humanity fight the encroaching hell that was to come. Thaisa and the Tree of Whispers can finally claim his head. With Elias's head now hanging from the tree and the soul stone attuned, the group can now continue their journey, but Thaisa decides to stay behind as her concerns lay elsewhere. Lorath is mysteriously missing from the gathering, and the others assume that his conversation with Elias before his death left Lorath consumed by what was said, and he has gone to do something brash. The group races to the Tree of Whispers, only to find that they are too late. Lorath has made a deal with the tree for knowledge, and now his head will hang there one day too. Devastated by this turn of events, Lorath mentions that he now at least knows that Lilith had made her way to Caldeum and intends to open the gates of hell that reside deep below the city. Act 6. The group makes way for Caldeum, only to find that the Cathedral of Light has completed its preparations for war on hell. After combing the ancient ruins for information, they learned that Lilith had attained the key and are now also in pursuit. Along the way, the Wanderer finds several signs of the fanatical zeal expressed by the followers of the Cathedral of Light. Many innocent people have been slain or hanged as traitors to the cathedral for even the slightest sign of dissension. Fear and misguided faith makes martyrs of them all. After reaching the heart of Caldeum, another portion of the prophecy comes to light. The sky itself rains blood, while the surrounding area itself lay in ruin. As the group makes its way through the city in search of the gates of hell, they come across a group of cultists who claim to worship the Lord of Hatred. After vanquishing them, the group wonders why the cultists mention the Lord of Hatred and not Elias or Lilith. Could it be that Mephisto has had a hand in all this since the start? The group finally encounters Inarius and a contingent of knights as he rallies them for a final push towards the gates of hell. During their discussion regarding Inarius' misguided efforts, he takes the Soul Stone from Donan and the group is left to their own devices. As they evaluate the options now left to them, The group deems the Wanderer to be the next best hope for stopping Lilith, having already done so much, in case the Soul Stone is truly lost to them. Making their way forward, the group encounters Reverend Mother Prava, who has some choice words that cause Donan to lose his temper after she claims that he is lucky that his son doesn't have to see Donan as he is now, questioning his faith. After the group regains composure, Lorath mentions that their goals align and they should venture forth together. Traveling as a group, Prava, the Knight's Penitent, and the Wanderer, along with their companions, continue in pursuit of the gates of hell, breaking through demonic hordes and ferocious enemies. The Wanderer becomes separated from the group for a time and encounters a deadly foe, Duriel, the Lord of Pain himself. After a fierce battle with the lesser evil, the Wanderer continues their path forward, having bested yet another lesser evil. The group waits for the Wanderer to rejoin as Prava and the Knights continue forward alone. After the Wanderer rejoins the group sometime later, they steal their resolve and continue forward toward the gates of hell. Nerel states that if they happen to locate the Soul Stone once again, it should be used on Mephisto instead. His powers of manipulation are too great to be left alone. She wonders why it should be used on his daughter if Lilith herself fears Mephisto in the first place. At last, the group enters the burning hells, a place where mortals were never meant to tread. Making their way through the macabre surroundings of sinew, bone, and ash, they encounter the remnants of what appear to be several knights of the Cathedral of Light, the final dregs of a terrible battle. They eventually happen across Prava's injured body and the Soul Stone. The group acquires it, and Prava, fueled by hatred and malice, deems them all to be heretics. Despite Lorath's protests, Donan gives Prava a tonic to help her get moving again. She reluctantly makes her way out of hell, and the group continues forward. Eventually, the Wanderer encounters more blood petals along the way, and is granted a vision of a battle that preceded them. Inarius and the full might of the Cathedral of Light waged the savage battle against an onslaught of demons. Inarius left the group to pursue Lilith, eventually finding her. He pierced her just as he assumed the prophecy had foretold, but nothing happened. Nothing had changed, and his action still fell upon the deaf ears of the heavens. In his confusion, Lilith removed the spear from her body and slayed Inarius with it, tearing his wings from his body and returning him to hell. This shattered the resolve of the Cathedral Knights fighting outside, leading to their deaths. Running low on options and still unable to locate Lilith within the burning hells, Lorath asks the Wanderer to use the sightless eye once again. In that moment, Donan is caught unaware by one of the horrors within hell and receives a mortal wound. Donan agrees that the eye is the only way forward, as time is indeed dire. Nerel and Lorath see to Donan while the Wanderer uses the eye. Unfortunately, Lilith was prepared and was able to trap the Wanderer within their own mind. While trapped within the nightmare, Lilith speaks to the Wanderer, asking them to once again join her cause. She notes that no matter what happens, her blood will always be a part of them, and that she has felt what they have felt. As the Wanderer makes their way through the nightmare, they encounter echoes of memories from the past, as well as previous adversaries. However, eventually they encounter hatred itself. The bloodied wolf once again offers aid to the Wanderer. It mentions that eventually there will come a time when they are enemies as well, but for now, they both desire Lilith gone. The Wanderer finally escapes Lilith's hold, returning to hell, and finding the others now surrounding Donan in dire straits, ready to breathe his last breath. Lorath and Donan share final words, and eventually, Donan closes his eyes forever, and Lorath loses yet another close friend. Shattered by this, Lorath stays behind with Donan, while Nerel and the Wanderer continue forward, eventually finding the bloodied wolf once again. They are reluctant to accept his aid, but take the fiery portal to finally reach the Cathedral of Hatred nonetheless. Nerel mentions that all of this seems too convenient, almost as if it has all gone to plan, according to Mephisto. Finally reaching the throne of hatred itself and Mephisto's essence, the pair is faced with a choice. Either use the stone on Lilith, or use it on Mephisto. The Wanderer can no longer trust their own thoughts concerning Mephisto and opts to let Nerel make the choice. She uses the stone on Mephisto, who claims that they have sealed their fate. The wolf appears once again and opens a portal, allowing Nerel to escape. They decide to meet at the chapel afterwards, and the Wanderer stays behind in order to stop Lilith once and for all. Lilith finds the Wanderer, and a fierce battle ensues, eventually ending with Lilith being felled. As she fades and turns to ash, still bewildered by the choices made, stating that the cost of victory against the prime evils will be far more than any are able to pay. Returning to Lorath and bearing news of their success, the Wanderer explains the choices that were made and wonders where Neyrelle is, but Lorath has yet to see her. Together, they carry Donan out of Hell and seal the gate behind, traveling to the desert chapel in search of Neyrelle. After reaching the chapel, Lorath and the Wanderer find it empty, wondering why she would have left them behind. Lorath notes that it is too soon for her to already be affected by Mephisto's influence from the stone, so her reason for leaving must have been something else. They leave for the vault in search of her, but encounter resistance while exiting the chapel. Prava had branded them as heretics, and they were now surrounded by cathedral knights, along with Yosef, the man who had originally saved the Wanderer in Nevesk. They would not take no for an answer, which unfortunately led to blows between them, rendering Yosef and the knights penitent no longer breathing. Lorath leaves for Skosglen to bury Donan, while the Wanderer traveled to the vault. Unfortunately, Neyrelle was nowhere to be found. Only a letter was left in her stead. Returning to Lorath, he reads the heraldic runes of the letter and learns that Neyrelle has fled with the stone in search of a better means of containing Mephisto, and perhaps a way to combat the prime evils. Whether this is of her own volition or the influence of Mephisto himself, only time will tell.